Hello. The former boss of News Limited, which is Rupert Murdoch's media organisation in Australia, would always start his talks with the following words. Hello, my name is John Hardigan, and I'm a journalist. I'd prefer to start as follows. Hello, my name is Andrew Jaspan, and I'm a recovering journalist. In fact, I'm in rehab, and so is most of my profession. Let me explain to you what I mean by this. As you all know, throughout the world, particularly the Western world, newspapers have been closing, journalists have been laid off, and of course, as a result of all of that, the quality of journalism has decreased. In certain cases, trust has been broken, and of course, the loser in all of this is you, and the quality of public discourse. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is an alternative model, a way of trying to rebuild trust in journalism and improve the quality of public discourse. And for public discourse, read better public ideas, better public information, and hopefully trusted, credible information. So now you know who I am. I'm not John Hardigan. A little bit of background about me. I thought I ought to reveal, because there's a lot of disclosure today, that I actually grew up in Perth. I lived in Netherlands. My father was at UWA. I sailed on the Swan. I surfed at Northcote. And then I left, went back to the UK. And after university, I went into journalism. I worked on a lot of papers, including Rupert Murdoch's Times and Sunday Times in London. I then edited the Scotsman in Scotland, the Observer in London, and my last job was starting and founding a new newspaper in Scotland called the Sunday Herald. But in 2004, I got a phone call from Mark Scott, who at the time was the editorial director of Fairfax. And Mark asked me if I would be interested in throwing my hat in the ring to become the next editor of The Age. And through a long process, I was appointed in the end of 2004, and I did that job until the end of 2008. So what I really want to talk today, as I said, is how we rebuild trust in journalism. Now, journalism is quite often referred to as the fourth estate, and what they mean by the fourth estate is its responsibilities to hold those in power, which used to be Parliament and the Church and the judiciary, to hold them in check, to account for their actions, to scrutinize. That's sometimes referred to as a watchdog role. Unfortunately, the watchdog at times has turned into a feral attack dog. And into all of that, we've got a lot of journalists who, frankly, have lost their moral compass. Now, when I was in London, I went to see a play. If any of you get a chance to see it, or if you can't see it, at least read the script, the screenplay. It's called Pravda. It's by a man called David Hare, and Anthony Hopkins played the role of Rupert Murdoch in it. And at one stage, a journalist comes to the front and says, you know, we've got to remember that a newspaper is not just a piece of paper. A newspaper contains words, and you need to be able to trust those words. Because without trust, there's no point even buying it. And that message has stayed with me, and I saw that in the mid-'80s, right at the beginning of my journalism career. In the UK, the crisis reached a peak around 2008. Revenues were collapsing, journalists were being taken out, circulations were falling. But into all of that, there was still huge competition to get scoops, to get exclusives. And of course, with fewer people to actually get those exclusives, certain organizations began to think, maybe we need to cut corners to speed up the process, and by the way, keep the editor happy, because I'm delivering the scoops. So guess what they did? They tapped phones. They bribed policemen for stories. And 5,000 phones were hacked. And let's not forget, that's not just 5,000 phones hacked. 5,000 continuous conversations were being hacked and listened into. And of course, those gave a huge number of exclusives. And people would constantly say, where did they get that story? Nobody knew until particularly The Guardian did some investigative work there, because initially the police and particularly News Limited or News Corporation in London would say nothing illegal is going on. And then it all came out. And now, 40 journalists have been arrested for corrupt practices, bribing public officials, hacking phones, including Rebecca Brooks, who ran the News Corporation, News International operation in London. And right now, as a result of that, as you probably know, Lord Leveson carried out an inquiry, and into that inquiry, he's enshrined a whole new way of working, which is partly what I want to talk about today. And the editors have been told that either they adopt those or they will be legally enforced. Watch that story, because that's live right now. In Australia, we have a different problem. There is still a cultural issue, because underlying those poor practices are cultural practices which become lax and allow that to happen. In Australia, the real problem, however, is one of media concentration. It's dominated really by two groups. News Limited owns 70% of the press in this paper, and of course they've increased the reach because each one of those newspapers now has a website, which means that they can actually extend their circulation or area in which they can be read outside the physical boundaries of wherever their newspapers exist. Here in Western Australia, of course, you have the West. Western Australia, not part of News Limited, but nonetheless, you also have a monopoly paper. And a monopoly paper is not only and doesn't matter, by the way, whether it's good or bad. The fact of the matter is that monopoly paper has a monopoly on distributing news and information within that city. And it's usually picked up by the local talkback in the morning. So these papers are particularly powerful. And of course, with Fairfax, we have Gina Reinhardt waiting in the wings. This year alone, and the Walkley Awards, by the way, were won by an extremely good journalist, West Australian, but who won the gold. But nonetheless, this year was a terrible year at the Walkley Awards because they had to report over 3,000 people in the media had lost their jobs this year. So what's the impact on you? Well, into those hollowed out newsrooms, what tends to happen is you take out the specialists, because they're the more expensive people, the reporters and journalists who've spent some time looking at the science round, or the environment round, or the defense round, or the politics round. Those have been taken out and replaced by cheaper, younger staff, usually known as general reporters. And general reporters come in the morning, they don't know what they're going to be asked to do. They get told by the editor to go out and cover this, chase a fire engine, whatever, cut up a tree. That's the kind of jobs that they now have to do. Or if they do need to do a complex issue, they have at best one day to find out about the subject, write it up in a supposedly authoritative way. Not only that, paginations are being cut. And I recently looked at The Age. I live in Melbourne. And one day there were 14 pages, and I counted the pages, and I saw that there was one page of world news, and believe it or not, 2 pages of Dan Murphy's. Now, why would you pay $2 for that? And you can spot that, and that's part of the reason why people just stopped buying, particularly newspapers. So if that's the problem, I now want to really talk about the solution. The first thing is we wanted to introduce a different approach. A different approach which started really with the basics. The most basic thing of all was, how are we going to come up with a new way of working to rebuild that trust? So I want to just quickly run through the journey that I went through to get to here. When I left The Age and left all the 24/7 aspects of that job, I caught up with Glyn Davis, the Vice Chancellor at the University of Melbourne. He and I had got to know each other reasonably well. We had a coffee. I told him about my concern about the future of quality journalism. He shared those views. He gave me a desk at the university and suggested that I went to talk to a range of people, which I did. As I wandered around the university, it sort of really hit me then, and I should have probably known this years ago, that a university covering a universe of subjects is not that different to my newsroom. So the university campus is like a virtual newsroom. You have your faculty of business, of science, obviously the arts, the environment, and of course within that you have politics departments, etc. That's much like my own newsroom. But within that were specialists, really truly smart people who hadn't just spent a day looking at a subject, they'd spent an entire career. And a career not just at that university, but within their peer networks, which meant not just within Australia, but internationally. So if you have to write about a tsunami, you will be able to tap into everybody you know who studies the Earth's crust throughout the world. That's the knowledge network, the global knowledge network that they bring. And of course, we began to talk then about the fact that the university is a knowledge creator, whereas The Age, my old paper, is a knowledge disseminator. So I really wanted to bring these two ideas together. And the key thing was that I needed to find a new way for academics to actually be drawn back into the public arena. And the reason for that is that a lot of academics had just withdrawn. And the reason they'd withdrawn from the public arena was this. And Peter Doherty, some of you may know, he was Australian of the Year. He's a professor of immunology, and his area of expertise is flu viruses. So every time a journalist would come in and interview him about a new strain of flu virus, he would give an answer, and at the end of it, he'd always think, I wonder how bad that is going to turn out tomorrow morning. He never ever thought, I'd better inform the public about a serious issue, is how bad will it turn out to be. And he was once bitten and twice shy. He just withdrew. And that's a real shame. And he withdrew because he said there's no point doing it. The only thing he would do is radio, because he felt he could control that. So what I wanted to do was to find a new way of re-engaging. And he came up with actually the idea. He said, you know, Andrew, what I'd like you to do is instead of you sitting across the table from me, I'd like you to come and sit right here next to me. I'd like you to use your journalistic skills to help me get my knowledge out to the public in a way which is safe and credible. That was the aha moment for this project. Now, there's of course a big difference between journalists and academics. Journalists tend to want to tell you the bad news. So bad weather outcomes, you know, so, okay, you know, there's another flood, there's another hurricane, and so on and so forth. Whereas the academic will try and understand those and give you some real context for changes in climate, and also offer potential solutions. So my quest really was to find a new way for academics and journalists to work together where we still try to understand that complexity, but try to offer something more. And by offering something more, what we wanted to do was put better integrity of information out there so that all of you can have better public conversations. And of course, into that, if we get that right, we actually do something really important for democratic society, because democratic society really does depend on high-grade information for you to be able to make up your minds on and act upon. And of course, in the year ahead, particularly important year with the federal elections, we need to have trusted information before we make up our minds next year. So one of the things we needed to do to build collaboration and trust was to find a new way of actually working with academics. Not only to rebuild trust with them, but also with readers. It's not good enough just to assert we are going to give you trusted journalism. You actually have to demonstrate how you're going to do it. How are you going to do it that's different? As I said to you, Lord Levinson has come up with a whole list of codes of how journalists have got to work differently in the past. So that's why we built The Conversation. The Conversation is a not-for-profit organization. And the idea is to build a pipeline of information direct from our partners, which is the university and research sector, including CSIRO, direct to you, the public. So here's some of our codes of conduct. The first thing is you can only write for our site if you actually really know what you're talking about. So when you write for our site, you have to register. There's a registration process. We authenticate you. We need to know who you actually are. We need to know that you really do know what you're talking about, that you can demonstrate your expertise back to the reader. The second thing we want to do is we want to have full disclosure. Now, what I mean by that is you need to tell the reader who funds you, who funds your research. You need to tell the reader if you have any conflicts, because that's the most important thing. How often have you read pieces in newspapers or wherever else, and you have no idea where the person's come from or in whose interest they act? The third thing we want to do is have these codes of conduct. Now, codes of conduct we actually took on board were largely those which exist within the universities. And within the university, there are very strict rules around research and around issues such as plagiarism, collaboration, trust, respect. But also enshrined in all of that is academic freedom. And in academic freedom, that allows for a diversity of views. So all those are enshrined in the way that we work. And by the way, I should make our own disclosure here. We are funded by this university, University of Western Australia, also by Murdoch University, and hopefully next year Curtin University. In addition, 20 other universities across Australia, CSIRO, and we also get some funding from the Department of Higher Education in Canberra and the Department of Innovation in Melbourne. And lastly, from Commonwealth Bank and Cause Chambers. But into every one of our contracts, including the one with University WA, is enshrined editorial independence. So this is an editorial project which is not, therefore, subject to PR or marketing objectives. This is a journalism project. Now, why do the universities fund us? Well, part of the reason is that you all pay, between you in this nation, $12 billion a year towards higher education research. My view is that they have a duty to share their research, their expertise, their knowledge, their wisdom better with you. And you have a right to demand access to that. So that's why we built this, as I say, giant pipeline between the two. The other thing is, of course, that I think we'll want to be known, and I say this with some trepidation, about being a country which is not just one big open mine, but also a clever country. So we launched it last year. We've had 10 million visits to the site. We're now Australia's biggest independent website, with Australia's biggest virtual newsroom, staffed by 4,500 specialists, people who really know what they're talking about, including, by the way, Steve Tingay, who you heard this morning, who's written 4 pieces for us already. So that's really what we try and do. And what have the media, the mainstream media, said about this? Well, they actually, believe it or not, really like what we're doing. And the reason they really like it is because we provide them with new ideas and new people that they can talk to. And also, everything we publish is on an open access basis called Creative Commons. So anybody, including anybody here, can pick up our stuff and republish it. It's free for you all to use. So many papers, and I'm just running out of time here, many papers have republished us. But at the end of the day, what I've really wanted to try and do is to bring back to you all trusted, high-grade information. I call this a democratization of knowledge project. And of course, not only are we unlocking the knowledge and in giving you that new information, the best thing of all about our project is everything in it, because of our funding model, which is supported, as I said, largely by universities, is free for you all to read, free for you all to share, and free for you all to republish. Now, quite often, I might have ended a talk like this in despair, but I actually think what we're beginning to do here is to recreate or to start a new journey in which we define the values of 21st century journalism. And those are transparency and good ethics, authentication, pluralism, democratizing knowledge, trust, and being open and global in your thinking. So what I wanted to finish off today by saying is, this is really our contribution to 21st century better informed citizenship. And I hope you'd agree with me that this too is an idea worth sharing. Thank you.